Sir Edrin Vellas, the Gallant Knight, Legacy. The inn was filled with visitors enjoying food and drink. Men and women alike were hiding from the heavy downpour that had riddled Northwind for a good while. In spite of that, moods were not dampened as the alcohol was poured in excess to keep the spirits high. A group of men were sitting next to the fireplace, warming themselves up from the cold evening. Chatting with each other gleefully, they garnered the attention of a drunk lumberjack from across the room, waddling towards them. His attempts at being suave were not so successful, as he burped and stammered them out more than anything. The fine ladies were getting visibly annoyed by their unwanted guest, much to his dismay. Irritated at the rejection, the lumberjack began arguing with the very ones he wanted to woo at first. Neither side wanted to let go, and emotions welled up quickly. The other guests started watching the spectacle, and the innkeeper tried to calm them down, but to no avail. Both sides' temper had reached a critical point, and a brawl was about to break out. But before any punches could have been thrown, an imposing cloaked figure stepped in between the fighting parties, his armoured gauntlets pushing them aside. The man implored them to simply enjoy the night and festivities. They scoffed at him and begrudgingly returned to their tables. He himself sighed and followed suit. Rubbing his stubble jaw, the knight leaned back into his chair in the corner of the room. Relieved he could prevent unnecessary violence, exhaustion had caught up to him after the long journey to Ambershire. All he wanted was a cold ale to end the day with. Fortunately for him, the innkeeper wanted to thank him for his aid and brought him a specialty mug, filled with the finest ale. Appreciating the gesture, the knight played down his efforts, saying anyone could have done the same. The innkeeper laughed and toasted his honoured guest. Before leaving him to his vices, he asked the cloaked man for his name. With reluctance, the knight answered, Edrin Vellas, Wanderer. Edrin left his room the next morning before sunrise. He had come to Ambershire for work, and had hoped that the wealthy people of Northwind would be in need of a pair of strong arms. Many of the resident lord's soldiers had been conscripted to liberate the island of Balor of intruders. At least, that's what Edrin had heard through the grapevine. It did not take long for the Wanderer to find work. A farmer had trouble caring sufficiently for his horses, something Edrin was not shy of doing. While he didn't really tend to the horses before, Woolrum had told him about the basics on how to properly handle a horse, one of the many lessons in knighthood the young man took to heart. Finishing up, the day had already advanced to the afternoon. Rewarded with food and coin, Edrin made his way to Stillheart Port. On his way, he got past the famed jousting grounds of Lord Amberwood and Amberwood Keep itself. Laying his eyes upon the tournament tribunals, he imagined what it would feel like to be cheered by the fascinated spectators. With a bittersweet chuckle, Edrin shook his head and continued onwards. The sky darkened, and he could tell by the pattering sounds on his heavy armour that rain had begun to fall once more. For the next few days, Edrin had been a blessing for the people of Northwind. His fighting prowess, endurance, and wit were valuable assets in aiding them wherever he could. Regardless of the complexity of the task, the wandering youth gave it his all to help those in need to the best of his abilities. Edrin was on his way back to the inn for a good night's rest when night had fallen. The hills of Northwind were quiet, except for an eerie howl racing through the auburn trees. Letting his mind wander through the depth of night, Edrin looked up at the sky, reminiscing of the past. It had been more than a year since Woolrum absconded him as a squire, and he hadn't seen him since. Wandered the kingdom, living from hand to mouth, taking the occasional job, still adhering to the dogma Woolrum had taught him, even without his guidance. He wondered where he'd be now. Edrin's thoughts were cut off by terrified screaming. Searching the perimeter, he noticed a small cottage off to the road, just a sprint away. He readied his blade and approached the house carefully, wasting no time. Coming closer, the young knight heard the clashing of steel and the audible exhaustion between two fighters. Two men, it seemed. The cries he heard first now turned out to be that of women. Whatever happened inside, Edrin had little time to act. Blood-curdling scream of pain echoed through the night. followed by more female screams. The time to think was cut short, and Edrin rushed to the cottage's door, flinging it open. The scene was hectic still. On one side, a mother and her daughter hysterically crying in the corner of the room. Opposite them, a tall man with a bent arm and bloodied sword in hand. On the ground, an armoured man, motionless. Edrin didn't have time to recollect all the information, but it was clear that he interrupted a robbery. The bandit turned toward the noise of the door and yelled at Edrin with wrathful eyes. He knew the young man, and after a few seconds, he would remember as well. The intruder in front of Edrin was none other than the guard he left to die during the escort job to Grand Hamlet. He had survived his injuries and seemingly turned to banditry afterwards. The misery inflicted upon him had not been forgotten, a feeling Edrin could well relate to. Pooling all of his anger and frustration into his sword, the bandit charged at his opponent, who blocked the powerful strike. It was obvious that he was a trained Stormwind guard, since his sword blows were precise and deadly. Edrin has trouble deflecting the sword, as he was both exhausted and caught off guard by the bandit's sudden burst of violence. He had to switch to the offensive. Quickly, putting the brigand into a lock with their weapons, Edrin grabbed the blade of his sword and hit his enemy's head with the pommel of its hilt. Taken aback by the abrupt force, he stumbled backwards, giving Edrin enough time to follow up with an upward slash across his chest, ending his life. Now 2 corpses laid on the ground, soaking it with even more blood. The mother and her daughter were still in shock and whimpered in their corner. Clearly drained of energy, Edrin tried to catch his breath. He wasn't at his best after the hard day of work, kneeling next to the robber. He made sure he was dealt with, and to his relief, he was no longer posing a threat. The knight sheathed his sword and turned to the women, assuring them that they were in danger no more. Nevertheless, they were still too caught up in their distress to be responsive. Edrin, on the other hand, was somewhat comforted by them calming down at least a little. With the situation under control, he turned his attention to the enigmatic armoured man who fought the bandit beforehand. The knight got close enough to see his face, and when he did, his heart skipped a beat. The corpse lying before him was Wulram, his old mentor. Bewildered, Edrin immediately picked him up from against the wall, but there was no way of saving him anymore. The book on Wulram Notley's life closed that night. Emotions raced inside him. Anger, grief, guilt, confusion. How could this have happened? Was this the retribution for his own selfish desire for revenge on the man he didn't even know the name of? The man who was unaware of the reason for his actions. Countless questions swirled inside his mind, one more condemning than the other, but in the end, no answer could soothe his conflicted soul. His doings caused this. No matter how much he would try to deny it, it was the unshakable truth. Regardless, he had others to take care of. Wiping away his tears, Edrin helped the 2 women up. Carrying the girl on his arm, he led them to the inn near Ambershire. The next day, Edrin went to Amberwood Keep to inform its residents of last night's happenings. From what the rescued mother had told him, she and her daughter welcomed Wulram into their home, as he needed to rest for the night. When they were attacked by the bandit, the old knight tried to defend them, but his old age had caught up to him, giving his enemy the lethal advantage. She said that Wulram was looking for someone, but Edrin quickly abandoned that thought. It was easier for him to not assume it to be the case, or else the guilt would have devoured him from within. Edrin explained to the Amberwood guards what had happened and accompanied them in retrieving the corpses. The thief was given a quick burial in an unnamed grave, whereas Wulram was laid to rest at his family's estate near Stormwind. Back in Ambershire, Edrin recalled last night's events. Being confronted with the consequences of his actions was devastating for the young man. With his head hanging low, he was approached by one of the guards he had assisted earlier. Edrin had drawn quite a lot of attention to him, so much that Lord Amberwood himself wanted to speak with him. Unable to refuse a noble's request, he nodded and followed the guard. Amberwood Keep was grand and imposing, worthy of the ruler of Northwind. Soon they reached the throne room, and both of them bowed before the lord. Lord Amberwood spoke of Edrin's helpfulness with his subjects, and expressed his gratitude for his aid. Furthermore, he thanked him deeply for avenging the death of Sir Notley, his favoured knight. Edrin was surprised. The noble that Walram had been in service to was Lord Amberwood himself. Even after his disobedience, the noble still spoke highly of him. Relieved, Edrin explained to him how Walram had wished for him to continue his legacy as an honourable knight, but that he had doubts he'd ever achieve that. The Lord denied his foolish notion with a chuckle, reassuring him there'd be no need for scepticism. Instead, he offered him a spot among his knights, leaving young Edrin speechless. From then on out, Edrin would grow in strength, mind, and soul. His noble deeds of heroism and valiance would be remembered not only among the citizens of Northwind, but the whole kingdom. The simple farmer's son, who had faced countless hardships and regret in his life, rose up to become a symbol of knighthood. The virtues he and his master stood for paved the way for all knights and squires following in their footsteps.